The most talked about topic in the whole of the Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire community has got to be that of Azor Ahai. Although known by many names, Azor Ahai, the prince who was promised, the warrior of light, Yin Tar, to name but a few, very little is actually known about this legendary hero. Supposedly born thousands of years ago at a time when evil and darkness was descending upon the world, Azor Ahai stepped forth with Lightbringer, the sword of heroes, and drove the darkness from the realm. To me this sounds more like a fairy tale you'd tell to children at bedtime. I understand that tales are twisted and exaggerated as they're passed from generation to generation, but this is just too black and white. The big shining hero with a magic sword, standing against the darkness that would consume the world. It doesn't fit whatsoever with the complexities that we're seeing in the modern day equivalent story. At this point some of you will be shouting at me that I've got it all wrong, and that the legend of Azor Ahai is not a literal interpretation pertaining to the rebirth of a single person, one that will use a magic sword to save the whole world, but rather it's a metaphorical representation of a group of people or events that is defined within the boundaries of the text of the prophecy. The problem with this solution is that the world created by George R.R. Martin is so vast and so complex, with so many characters and locations and events, that any number of these factors could be inserted as the metaphorical representation of the Azor Ahai definitions, which have clearly been left unspecific enough so as to house a variety of potential candidates. Let's take a closer look at what is known of the Azor Ahai prophecy as an example of this purposeful vagary. The first passage says, "After a long summer, when the stars bleed and the cold breath of darkness falls heavy upon the world." In a world where every summer lasts for years, the notion of a long summer seems somewhat mute. Every summer is a long summer. It could be said that Westeros has just experienced the longest summer in living memory. But the text doesn't say the longest summer. It gives a less definitive description, leaving the onus on the reader to interpret according to their own perceptions and requirements. The bleeding star is more contentious still. When the red comet appears in the sky above Westeros, nearly everyone in the land attributes it to mean something different, depending on who they serve, the situation they're in, or even their own hopes and fears for the future. Much like real-world astrology, it gives just enough detail for people who believe in astrology to attribute things that they perceive or experience to the words that they are told, but never specific enough as to make definitive predictions. Perhaps Sir Arthur Dayne at the Tower of Joy was the bleeding star. Maybe Ashara giving birth was the bleeding star. Perhaps the comet that appeared the night Prince Aegon was born was the bleeding star. Perhaps, maybe, perhaps. Therein lies the true heart of the Azor Ahai prophecy. When the cold breath of darkness falls upon the world could mean the others. Or it could just mean winter. Again, it's vague enough to encourage us to apply our own perceptions into the text, correlating our own thoughts within the boundaries of the prophecy. It's a neat way of making us feel clever, which we all love to do. The next part is especially non-specific, yet it's the part that people mention the most. Azor Ahai shall be born again amid salt and smoke. This could pretty much be anyone. Daenerys, Jon, Aegon, Rhaegar, Stannis, Victarion, Bran, Tyrion, Jaime, all have their own theories to be the chosen one. My own preference is Hot Pie. As a baker, Hot Pie was born again amidst the salt and smoke of the kitchens that he worked in. Thus Hot Pie is Azor Ahai. I'm joking, obviously. Waking dragons out of stone and pulling a sword from a burning fire, these are much the same. Interpret them as you wish. Melisandre certainly does, and she's the lead voice in championing the second coming of Azor Ahai. But then, Melisandre is pretty much wrong about everything. The Woods Witch tells King Aerys, who was still Prince Aerys at the time, that the prince who was promised would be born to his line. But let's put this into perspective. She's a Woods Witch trying to ingratiate herself into the royal court, Of course she's going to tell him that. It doesn't make it true. You might argue that she's extremely accurate when we meet her again as the ghost of High Heart. Well, yes and no. She does foretell events that happen later on, but in a way that's so cryptic that it's not obvious that that's what she's predicted until after the event has occurred, which kind of nullifies the whole notion of seeing it in advance. So we wouldn't know that she's right about Azor Ahai until after we find out who it is, which is kind of pointless, especially if, as I'm predicting, Azor Ahai is nothing more than the biggest red herring in the whole of the story. There's an interesting quote from Bonaro the Red Priest on Azor Ahai, which says, "Death itself will bend its knee, and all those who die fighting in Azor Ahai's cause will be born again." Which might suggest that the great other is Azor Ahai. Death certainly bends its knee to him, and he has a knack of bringing people back after they've died. This would actually make sense if the legends that we hear are true. After all, the original Azor Ahai did kill his own wife in order to make a sword, which doesn't sound like something a hero would do. Whilst we're on the subject of Lightbringer, there's a few issues here I'd like to point out. Firstly, smiths have been tempering steel in water since Smith started tempering steel. So why is it that it didn't work for the Chosen One? Then stabbing a lion through the heart seems bizarre and just cruel, but not as bad as stabbing his own wife through the heart, which wouldn't have worked anyway. If you haven't noticed, swords are longer than people are, so it would have just gone straight through her, essentially tempering the sword just with air, which definitely wouldn't work. I'm being pedantic, I know, but I'm just highlighting once again that none of the original story makes any sense. But people make sense out of it by applying their own metaphorical interpretations in order to find solutions to the problems. But I'm not saying that it's wrong to do so. In fact, you don't really get a choice in the matter, because that's how brains work. They try to make order out of chaos, find patterns where there are none. It's a perfectly human reflex, and also quite fun. Another human facet which helps to promote this theory is that of a chosen one. We book readers and fans of movies or TV love a chosen one. Harry Potter was built on this premise, as was Star Wars and The Matrix and Avatar, etc. It's a proven tactic for success because we the fandom drink it up until we're full to the brim. So to the theorists that get lost in a world of metaphorical resemblances pertaining to the metaphysics of Azor Ahai, just beware the words of Marwyn the Mage. You don't need me to remind you of what they are. But if you should find yourself moaning in delight, gorged in the throes of the pleasures of prophecy, then prepare yourself for the inevitable clamping of the teeth.